Two 8th grade girls hung out at a hiking trail after school like so many area kids did one warm February day. It would be the last day Abby Williams and Libby German would be seen alive. After 8 hours of searching across 2 days, the girls' dead bodies would be found less than a mile from where they went missing the following morning. The Delphi murders would go unsolved for almost 6 years before someone would be arrested in connection with the murders, and their case may not be done yet. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Crafty Crimes Podcast. I actually don't have a craft this week. It's been kinda hectic. My dog died. I'm away on a work trip. It's just been a whole thing, and I didn't have time or the actual space for crafting this week. I know it's sacrilege. You're always supposed to carry your crafting supplies, but I don't have any. I am planning on something fun and challenging that I'll hopefully be able to roll out in the next episode, though, so don't worry. So, today, I'm going to sit here casually and talk to you about the Delphi murders. Personally, I don't think the case is done quite yet, but I'll explain more about that towards the end of the episode. First, though, we're going to talk about Abby and Libby. We're going to talk about the murders, the suspects, the court case, and all of it. So, without further ado, get comfy and grab your crafting supplies. Liberty German was born to Derek German and Carrie German Timmons on December 27, 2002 in Lafayette, Indiana. Her parents divorced when she was young, but both remarried and blessed her with 2 more sisters each. Libby grew up to be a goofy girl. Her family says they remember her as someone who made you laugh. She was an active teen. Libby played soccer, softball, volleyball, and was on the swim team. She was an honor student on the academic team and played saxophone for the school band. So you know that this family was busy all the time with all of those activities for just one kid. I'm sure the 4 others they had also had activities, so that was one busy family. Abigail Joyce Williams was born to single mother Anna Williams on June 23, 2003 in St. Marie, Michigan. Abby spent a lot of time outdoors. Her family says she enjoyed riding ATVs, camping, and photography. She also played saxophone and played softball, and that was actually one of or 2 of the many things that Abby and Libby would bond over to lead to them being best friends. Both Abby and Libby attended Delphi Community Middle School. On February 13th, 2017, 13-year-old Abby and 14-year-old Libby went to Mannon High Bridge after school. I guess there was an early release that day for whatever reason, but they were dropped off by one of the girls' relatives, but no one knows what relative or whose family. Libby and Abby arrived at the park around 1:49 p.m. on February 13th. They spent the next several minutes goofing off and doing whatever it is that teenage girls do. But their fun would come to an abrupt end. Around 2:07 p.m., Libby posted a photo of Abby walking along the Freedom Bridge on Snapchat, and it's the last time either girl would be seen alive by the public. The girls were soon forced off the trail by an unnamed bridge guy that Libby managed to capture a video of on her phone. Time stamp on that read 2:13 p.m. that is the last for sure time we know that Abby and Libby were alive. The girls had set up a time to meet their families across the street before being dropped off at the park. When the girls didn't show up around 2:30 like they had agreed, the families started to worry. The families then went out to start looking for their girls, and by 4 p.m., Libby had a frantic voicemail on her phone from her grandmother. Around 5:30, the families called the Carroll County Sheriff's Department and reported the girls missing. A search began that night for Libby and Abby. The search was officially called off close to midnight. The families continued to look for their daughters. The police gathered volunteers at 10 a.m. the next day to begin searching the rest of the town for the missing middle schoolers. But by 12:45 on February 14th, the Sheriff's Department called off their search. At 2:33 p.m. the following day, they announced in a press conference that they had found the bodies of Abby and Libby. The pair was found on Ronald Logan's property about a mile off the trail. Abby was dressed in Libby's clothes, and Libby was found nude. Abby's clothes were later found in the nearby river. Livor mortis had already set in for Abby when the bodies were found, which means that they had been dead for at least 8 hours at that point. And most of the details of the murder would go unknown until the trial in 2024. So going forward in the episode, if I mention a piece of evidence and you don't remember it, just file it away in your old steel trap because you'll need it later. The murders would go unsolved for the next 6 years, though admirably not from the lack of trying, and it's not too often that you can say that. By 6:50 p.m. on February 15th, law enforcement had already released the man on the bridge photo. A week later, a recording of a man saying, "Go down the hill," was released to the public, and that audio clip was pulled from the recording on Libby's phone. The FBI was working hard to get this case solved as well. 6,000 electronic billboards across 46 states displayed the images of Abby, Libby, and the bridge guy. A tip line was set up on February 23rd, and by March 9th, more than 11,000 tips had come in. It seems like the whole nation wanted to bring Abby and Libby justice, and I think that's nice. I really do. 2 months in, and the investigation was still going strong. By April 13th, over 16,000 tips had come in, and law enforcement had followed up on nearly 500 leads. You see, this case was unique in that it had multiple law agencies working together. Indiana State Police, Carroll County Sheriff's Department, Delphi Police, and the FBI all worked around the clock to get this case solved. Abby and Libby's families were doing their part to keep the murders at the forefront of everybody's mind as well. Members from both sides of both families began to sit down for interviews with Nancy Grace, Dr. Oz, Dr. Phil, and other TV personalities to talk about how much light Abby and Libby brought to their lives. On April 27th, they, the families, announced the construction of a softball field in Delphi in the girls' honor. A memorial softball tournament was hosted, and that funded the construction of the new field. Another 3 months pass before a composite sketch is released of the suspect. The sketch was made using the descriptions provided by witnesses from the park at the time of the murders. The sketch is plastered all over Delphi, and ironically, one of the suspects would be photographed with his wife in front of one of these posters in a bar in I think it was 2019, maybe it was 2020. The sources are kind of all over the place on some of the dates. After the sketch release from July 17th, 2017, the case falls by the wayside and gets pushed further into obscurity by other sensationalized cases. But that doesn't mean that Indiana had forgotten about its beloved teenagers. Police had already identified a potential suspect thanks to the billboards funded by the FBI. Law enforcement in Colorado had seen the bid for tips and contacted ISP with information about a similar case that they had had over the summer. But whatever information they provided must not have been very significant or very helpful, because Indiana State Police did not arrest their suspect, Daniel Nations, in connection to the Delphi case. Daniel Nations, though, did get arrested for unrelated drug charges in a different county in the state of Indiana. So that is arrest number 1 that the Delphi murders have led to. Ronald Logan, the individual whose property the girls were found on, also came under investigation. Obviously, of course, they're on your property. Logan was allegedly very rough with women, and cell phone GPS put him near the murder site when the girls died. But when police questioned him about his whereabouts on February 13th, Ron told the investigators that he was out and about in town. The police, cell phone GPS pinged him on his property when he said he was out, though. And if that little tidbit doesn't strike you as overly suspicious, don't worry, because it didn't, strike me as suspicious either. But the police actually put a lot of stock in Ron Logan as a suspect, thanks in part to an interview an ex-girlfriend did. An ex-girlfriend of Ron's did an interview with News Nation on January 21st, 2025, to encourage the police to officially name him a suspect. In her interview, Connie Dillman, the ex-girlfriend, told Ashley Banfield, host of News Nation, that Ron had a proclivity towards young girls and that she thinks it's entirely possible he committed the murders. Connie says that Logan followed tons of young girls online and liked to leave racy comments under their photos and in their inboxes. She even claimed that Ron had attempted to talk to the girls online previously, but the police did not find that connection. To be totally fair, though, Connie could just be a scorned lover. Supposedly, when Logan was arrested in April of 2017 on charges related to drinking and driving, he made a confession to a fellow inmate about killing Abby and Libby, saying he cut them up with a box cutter. Now, at the time, the details about the box cutter were unknown, so the police are still giving that confession some weight. You don't remember a box cutter? That's fine, we'll get there. Regardless of if he was an accomplice in the Delphi murders or not, Logan died in jail in 2022 of COVID, so if they ever do connect him to the murders, he would be convicted posthumously, and quite frankly, I don't think they're going to do that. I don't think they'll convict someone posthumously. I actually don't even know if that's been done before, so if you know, let me know in the comments. Personally, I'm not sure how much I believe Connie. She reads as very chaotic, and I really think that this interview that she did with News Nation was just her way of trying to get her 15 minutes of fame. But you can find her interview on YouTube and form your own opinion about it. I can understand why Ron is considered a serious suspect, but I'm not sold on him. I need a little more. And I think the box cutter confession poses its own issue. But for now, after the investigation into Ron Logan, the case is stalled and the next suspect isn't named until April 2021, which is 4 years later. Now, I had a friend who began working at a clinic in Delphi at the beginning of 2021. And she said that the overall attitude of the community was just frustration. Apparently, everyone felt that they knew who did it and that the police were just not doing their jobs. So when our final suspect was finally indicted, the small town cheered. Despite law enforcement's reminding locals of their faith in their own abilities to solve the case, the townsfolk had their doubts, and rightfully so. I mean, at this point in 2021, it's been 4 years and you haven't brought forward a suspect, so I would also be doubting your ability. James Caldwell Jr. is named as a person of interest in the Delphi murders in April of 2021 after he attempted to kidnap and rape a 9-year-old girl in Lafayette. Whether investigators found anything substantial is unknown, but because he hasn't been tied to any part of the case yet, I'm going to go ahead and assume that they didn't. Caldwell is a habitual offender in that he has groomed and sexually assaulted and attempted to kidnap multiple young girls. So he's really just a scumbag, whether if he did this or not. But y'all can rest assured that he was sentenced to 90 years for the attempted kidnapping and sexual assault of that 9-year-old girl. He's been behind bars since December of 2021 and won't be eligible for parole until 2091. So, you know, this guy was like the actual worst, but he is at least off the streets now. So that's bad guy number 2 arrested because of the Delphi murders. And pedophile number 1. Or maybe pedophile number 2, honestly. It's hard to say because, I mean, unless we know if Ron was one or not. I'm getting away from myself. Let's get back to it. Someone else I want to mention that the police were looking into in 2020 is a man named Keegan Kline. Now, Keegan Kline did actually attempt to groom Abby, and he's groomed girls in the past as well. He has a history of grooming them and then soliciting explicit photos from them, sometimes at the behest of his dad, which, like, ew. Under the username Anthony Schatz, Keegan had been messaging Abby on Instagram at the time she died. And while he was determined to not have been the killer, I do think he was a good lead, and I am glad he was investigated because, thanks to this case, Kline was brought up on 25 felonies and will be spending the next 4 decades in prison. So that is bad guy number 3 and pedophile, definite pedophile, number 2, arrested and off the streets because of this case. I just wanted to let you know, though, especially with that Keegan Kline and the James Caldwell and Daniel Nations, that there were some serious suspects in the 6 years before an official arrest was made. They were not idle. They weren't just like sitting by and tapping their fingers on the desk. They were actually working to try to solve this case. But now we're going to talk about the man who was convicted of killing Libby and Abby, Richard Allen. Richard Allen is an Indiana native. He was likely born in September 1972 and married his wife, Kathy, presumably in November of 1991. And I say likely and presumably because while I'm pretty sure that I found those records online through Indiana Legacy, I can't be 100% sure that it's them without some other identifying information. So I say likely and presumably, but that's when it happened. He moved to Delphi from Mexico in December of 2006, where he lived with his wife until his arrest. Allen was arrested at his job at CVS on October 26, 2022, where he had worked since getting his farm tech license in 2016. Prior to his arrest, the only things on his record were like minor traffic violations. And just 2 days after the arrest, Richard Allen was officially indicted on 4 counts of murder. As I mentioned earlier, law enforcement was not idle during the years-long search for the Delphi murderer. They had received so many tips that they required the help of volunteers to sort through them all. So in September of 2022, a volunteer named Kathy Shanks found a tip from Richard Allen that placed him at Mannon High Bridge at the time of the murders. And so she turned this over to proper law enforcement. Over the next month, the police worked to gather the evidence they needed to arrest Allen. The evidence brought against him was his resemblance to the sketch of the man on the bridge, the sound of his voice in comparison to the audio, an unspent bullet found at the crime scene, and incriminating statements made over the phone to the tip line and to his wife. I think part of what makes this case so sensational and what keeps it earning its place in the media circus is because there are a lot of things in this case that just don't add up. In my opinion, most of the evidence brought to court was circumstantial at best. But a court of our peers thought it was enough to convict, obviously, because we're here. But initially what hooked me on this case was the detail about Abby wearing Libby's clothes. Like, that just doesn't make sense. And I think it's details like that plus the gag order that was on police and, you know, the court systems about this case. Like, all of the mystery that surrounded it is what I think keeps it sensational. The trial began on October 14th, 2024. The defense team attempted to pull speculation away from Allen by providing another suspect, the Odinist cult. However, Special Judge Francis Skull decided not to allow this theory. And honestly, I think that was the right call. The defense decided to try to paint this different suspect narrative based on some sticks that were found on and around the bodies. Allen's defense attorney posited that the sticks were laid out in a ritualistic manner, but I don't know. The configuration doesn't look very ritual to me. Police thought of these sticks as an attempt at concealment, but as you can see from the diagram beside me, there was no real concealment happening here either. I don't know what's up with these sticks. But there was no other evidence of ritualistic killing either. So I am definitely glad that the judge decided to suppress that specific defense, because there's no point in causing a cult panic when there's not even a cult to begin with. Odinism, by the way, is a sect of Norse paganism that honors Odin, obviously. When Odinism made its way to the West, it got mixed in with some neo-Nazi groups and thus has become synonymous with white supremacy here, at least in the United States. I'm not sure how the group is perceived in other countries or if they're up to the same shenanigans there. But I do know that in the U.S., they've been responsible for 6 terrorist attacks and are considered a domestic terrorist group. So there's that. Regardless, though, this specific religious sect seems more concerned with being neo-Nazis and people who aren't white than what 2 teenage white girls in Indiana were up to on a Monday afternoon. So, with the alternate suspect theory thrown out, Allen's defense had to work out a new strategy, and just weeks before the trial at that. So the attorney's second choice was to call law enforcement into question. During the trial, the defense asserted that Allen was caught in the crossfires of multiple law enforcement offices who don't know how to communicate. And the defense also alleged that law enforcement was tired of having the community put pressure on them to solve this case, so they manipulated the facts of the case to fit their suspect just so they could get it cleared. The prosecution, however, relied on the story that they could spin from the evidence. The thing that should have acquitted Allen, in my opinion, but didn't, was the testimonies provided by the forensic experts. One CSI tech testified that no DNA evidence was recovered at the scene, and everything that they did sample belonged to either Abby or Libby. Another CSI testified that the .40 caliber pistol that had been found in Allen's home matched the unspent bullet from the crime scene. How they determined that, and without a metallurgic expert, I don't know, but it was in the trial, so they very clearly did it somehow. And finally, yet another forensic expert testified that the girls bled to death from the cuts on their neck, and that while Abby was probably attacked first, Libby would have been the first to die. He also said that he believed a box cutter was the responsible weapon, but left it out of his official report because he couldn't be sure. Y'all remember the box cutter from earlier? Okay, so other than Ron Logan making that comment to a fellow inmate about killing Abby and Libby with a box cutter, this detail had quite literally not been mentioned before this moment in court. So while I think Connie might be a little crazy, Ron's confession has something here, but also I'm not a big fan of the medical examiner leaving information out of his report, or just coming to trial without something to back it up and say that, yep, this is what I believe and why, and just kind of throwing at everyone the day of, oh yeah, I've actually thought it was a box cutter the whole time, I just didn't want to say anything. That's really sketchy to me. So while when you look at it from just the perspective of, oh well, Ron confessed to killing the girls with The box cutter, obviously, he did it. When you know more about, like, the box cutter, you're like, well, I mean, he could just be talking out his ass, because Keegan Kline did that too. You know? That's a tangent, though. Let's get back on track. This is why I got a crochet, by the way, while I host my podcast, because if I don't, I'm just gonna, like, talk forever. So, let's get back to it now. Ultimately, the prosecution laid out the better argument because after all was said and done, the jurors convicted Richard Allen of 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of felony murder, which just means that a death occurred during some other illegal activity. In the case of the Delphi murders, the primary illegal activity is kidnapping, and the kidnapping resulted in their death, which is the felony murder, and then, he killed them with box cutter, so that's the regular murder. On Monday, November 11th, 2024, Richard Allen was sentenced to 130 years in prison. His attorney has already filed a motion to overturn his ruling and says that she plans to continue to fight for Allen and the justice he deserves. And I do think it's important to remind you here that most of the community in and around Delphi already believed Allen was guilty long before he was arrested. So he really should have had a change of venue. I mean, it is his constitutional right, but I'm just a girl on the... My friends is the Delphi murders. And it may not be over yet. Personally, I don't think that it is. I think that the use of a secondary serrated knife suggests a second perpetrator. And with Libby being found naked and Abby being found dressed in Libby's clothes, I don't for 1 second believe there wasn't a sexual component involved like the police claim. Even if they didn't recover anyone's, like, semen or DNA, I can't imagine why you would have 2 teenage girls undress to murder them if there was not some kind of sexual component here. It also bothers me that the prosecution really failed to establish anything other than means and opportunity. They were both there at the same time and he had a box cutter, but why? They didn't establish the why, and that bothers me. At least not one that I'm aware of. Like, you don't just pull 2 random people off the street and go, these'll do, stab, stab, stab. They didn't establish a motive. The guy in a second composite sketch that was released that we didn't talk about because it was not on the official timeline, he looks really young. So I guess we'll see who turns up as the next suspect. And honestly, I think both Ron and Richard, to an extent, look like Bridge Guy. But they also, neither one perfectly encapsulates Bridge Guy. But if we trust the second composite sketch, then the accomplice would have been much younger. So we're just going to have to see where it goes from here. I don't know. I'm not saying that Richard Allen didn't kill those girls, but I am saying that with the evidence that was given, I'm not fully convinced he did, Like, people say they kill things all the time. People say they're going to do this. People say they're going to do that. People say they did this. But when it comes down to it, a lot of us lie. So I need something more than a hotline tip saying that he killed the girls. And some actual concrete evidence to be convinced, And I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't. But, I don't know. What do you guys think? What do you think is the most compelling or uncompelling piece of evidence for Richard Allen's arrest? that's all I have for you this week, folks. So thanks for hanging out with me today. I actually really did enjoy this. I know that sounds so silly to say, but I've enjoyed hanging out with you guys today. And I hope you enjoyed it too. I know it was different and chaotic, but that's who I am. I don't have a craft this week, so there's nothing to show, so I don't know how to end this. So yeah, there you go. Remember to choose kindness where you can and to stay crafty, and I will be back at you soon in 2 weeks with a topic I haven't decided on yet. Bye.